What have you learned so far? What are the basic messages that you've discussed?
Everything's God's.
All right, everything belongs to God.
And you need to have His blessing and guidance for
Okay.
what to do with the
All right.
things He's given.
All right, everything belongs to God. We need God's blessings and guidance and all that we do. What else have we discussed?
What do we trust in?
All right, what do we trust in? Who do we trust?
Who do we trust?
Okay.
What do we trust in?
All right. How does that translate to the use of our resources, of our financial resources? Where have the conversations gone over the last couple of weeks?
They gave us homework to do, so we haven't gotten into that.
All right. Remind me of the homework, Howard. Oh, there are a bunch of questions to ask about our priorities. Yeah.
Tracking variable expenses.
Yeah, our expenses, our values. And so that homework is due when?
We don't know exactly, do we?
When He gets back.
When he gets back. All righty. I assume he'll be back next week. Okay. All right. Well, he asked me if I would lead us in a conversation about the parable of the talents, and he's given me an idea of what he wanted to do with that. And so the first thing you're going to do is to help tell the story of the parable of the talents. So you, without even having to go to the text, if you need to, you know it's in Matthew 25, but you know this story. So talk about the story. I want to hear from you the parable of the talent. So there is a master or a manager or a landowner, the boss, heads out on a long journey, yeah? And so what does the boss do before he leaves? How's the story go?
He gives different amounts. Different amount of talents to 3 different people.
To who? Who does he give it to?
To his, I believe they were called servants.
Yeah, all right, servants. So he pulled together 3 servants before he left, and he gave different amounts to those servants. First servant, he gave what to?
5 bags.
Second servant,
3.
2, and then 1. And what did he tell them to do with it? With the resources? What were his instructions to him?
Where is it in
Matthew 25, 14. As far as I can tell, he gave them no instructions, right? He just said, "Here are these talents." So let's pause for a moment to talk about a talent. When we use the word talent, we mean gifts or skills. But a talent in that world, in that context, in the Roman world, was a measure of weight. And as a measure of weight, it depended upon what you were measuring, whether it was silver or gold, in terms of what its value was. But if the weight itself, as I read it, and Lonnie came up with something different, the weight that I saw was about 75 pounds worth. It was just about enough for a man to be able to hold a gold bullion with a handle in one hand. It was the equivalent of about, let me make sure I got this right, 16 and a half years of full-time work. A talent was the equivalent of 16 years worth of labor. And so to give one talent was an extraordinary gift. To give 5 talents is a fortune. All right? And so the master says to the servants, I'm giving you responsibility for this wealth. And then he went away to the far country. So what did the first servant do with his 5 talents? Doubled it. How? All righty? Yeah, he invested it. The language, he went off and traded with them. He went off and traded with them, and he doubled the 5. And the second servant went off and traded with them, and he doubled. And so the 2 went to 4. And the third servant did what?
Planted it.
All right, yeah, planted it, dug a hole, buried it. Why?
He was a farmer, he thought he'd grow.
Huh?
He was afraid of the master because he thought the master, well, the truth is, he didn't know the master.
All right, okay.
He didn't know that the master was a loving, forgiving person, so in fear, he hid it, didn't use it.
All right. So, I think at least in part the answer is his own fear, his fear of the master. But didn't he do something? I mean, he didn't squander it, did he? I mean, this is not the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son received 1/3 of his father's property, which was due to him only when his father died. The son demanded that money be given to him now. The father gave him 1/3 of the property. He went off and squandered it all until he ended up with 0. This guy did better than that, didn't he?
But the accusation that he made, I knew that you were a harsh man, that you would sow where you didn't reap, and so forth. His defense, he said,
His defense was, I didn't want to make you mad, but he did protect it. He didn't give it away. It could have been worse, I suspect, if he had gone and spent it. But what he did was protect it. And now when the master comes back, he goes and he talks to each of the servants. So servant number 1, what'd you do? What'd you do with the talents that I gave you? All right, double the talents. The master says what? What does the master say?
You've been entrusted with little, and you will be given much.
Yeah, right. Say that again.
That you've done well with little, and so you will be given much.
Right. And so the second servant, goes ahead. He doubled it. Went from 2 to 4. Also received praise. I've given you little, and therefore you will receive much. And then the confrontation with servant number 3. So servant number 3 is what? Defensive? protective.
Well, he kind of espouses to the Will Rogers philosophy of finance. It's not return on investment, but return of investment.
Of investments. All right. Explain the difference.
Well, there's no risk, no gain.
Okay.
So with nothing risk, nothing gain, but at least you got your principal back.
Okay. So he was given one. At the end of the time, he returned with one. Did the master ask them to double the money? Did the master ask him to invest? How would he have known what he was supposed to do with it? I'm trying to find some sympathy for the one, because that one at least had what the master gave him when he came back. I don't think that the point of the story is that the master is in fact harsh, but what the master said was pretty strong. What are the words that the master said? So the guy said, "You're a harsh master. I didn't want to do anything to upset you, and so here is the talent that you gave me." So
Called him lazy and wicked.
called him lazy and wicked. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter. You ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10. For to all who have, more will be given, and they'll have abundance. And for those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. That almost takes your breath away. The ones who have a lot are going to be given more. The ones who have little will be given less or nothing. Take away. And as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why?
I'll comment first. The one who doubled his money with 5 and the one that doubled his money with 2, the master didn't make any distinction between the two.
Right.
It wasn't how much they returned, it's that they took what he had given and gave it the effort. Now, applying that to us and to this third one, you have been given 5 talents, Jack, okay? I mean, literally in a spiritual sense, okay? Some of us have 2, some of us have 1. And God's not going to judge us on whether we can teach and preach as well as you can, or know Scripture as well as you can, or convert as many people. But with what talent we have, we should use it, okay? Whether it's 1, 2, or 5. And the guy with 1, he didn't use what he'd been given, okay?
Okay.
And the relation, I think, to us is what gifts we have been given and how we use them.
All right.
Amen.
As most of the parables are, there are 2 or 3 levels in which a parable may be understood. The point that Bob wants to make sure that we make has to do with how we use our money, which is the theme of our time. There's a larger issue just concerning the use of what we've been given. So the word talent, which meant a weight or a measure, it's like a British pound. How much is a pound, worth? All right, it's a weight that comes to be a measurement of value. But over time, then, because of this story, the word talent has come to mean what it means now in English, the use of what we have been given in terms of our skills, our gifts, etc. So that's the second level. So the money, the literal level, the gifts that we may have been given as a second level. Let me start with the outside level, which I think the context of this parable gets at, and then move back. In these chapters, there are several stories in a row. Chapter 24, chapter 25, that are about the end times. You've got at the beginning of chapter 24, there is the prophecy of the destruction of the temple. The temple is going to be destroyed. And then there's this little apocalyptic section. So I'm going to take a moment and describe kind of what's going on. It's hard, so we can see where the parable of the talents fits. I want to see the big picture first, and then move our way to the specific application. Apocalyptic literature was a very common and very popular kind of literature in that ancient world and all the nations, but certainly in Israel, in which highly symbolic language is used, usually the language of persecution and destruction, and time is telescoped. You know what it looks like to look at the wrong end of a telescope, where you don't know how close or how far things are. And so Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple, which would take place about 40 years later, in 70 AD. And he also talks about the end of time. And all of that is just kind of crammed together, which is what apocalyptic literature does. The greatest example of apocalyptic literature we have in the New Testament is the book of Revelation, the last book, which is in Greek called the Apocalypse. So you've got this apocalyptic section. Things are going to be bad. This is going to happen in your lifetime. Some of you will be alive when this happens. And they were. And the temple is destroyed. And then as he talks about that destruction, the whole end of the age is brought together. This highly symbolic language and the coming of the Son of Man. He's not trying to give us details. He's not telling us it's going to be this going to happen, this going to happen. When you see this, then know that Jesus is going to come, or I'm going to return to someday. Even Jesus didn't know when he's going to come back. I don't know. You don't know. Anyone that says Jesus is going to come back when this and this and this happen, and that may be next week, don't listen to them, because that's not what this passage means. But it sets the hook for the description of the end of the age. You need to be ready. You need to have values that reflect the kingdom when things fall apart. For some of you, they will happen in your lifetime. But there will be a time someday when all of this comes to an end. And the question is, are you ready? Are you prepared? How are you living now? How are you using your time? What kind of disciple are you? What's important to you? What are your priorities? What are your values? Because if you spend your time thinking that this is what it is, and the way we're living now is what it is, and what you do or acquire or use in your lifetime is all that there is, you will have squandered what God has given you, because there is a larger picture than what's happening now. There are things that are happening and will happen that will put your faith to the test. So the question that hangs over all of these stories is, are you prepared? Are you ready? How are you living? What are you doing? What's important to you? What are your values? So you've got the destruction of the temple foretold, the signs of the end of the age, and all the persecutions. What he refers to as the desolating sacrilege, which happened in the temple itself. The desolating sacrilege, the first time that word is used is back in the days of the Maccabees, which would have been 164 BC or so, when the Greeks came down from Syria and entered the temple and tore everything apart and pulled everything out and desolated what God had given. And it was a shocking, horrible moment. And Jesus says, gonna happen again. It's gonna happen again. If you think, I mean, this is the message of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, back 500 years before, said, you keep saying, but we have the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord, Jeremiah, I think, 17. Like, God has given his temple, and as long as the temple is here, nothing will ever happen to you all. And therefore, we can live any way we want to because, God gave us the temple. And Jeremiah said to his people in that day, not going to help you. The fact that the temple is here does not mean that you are therefore protected and it doesn't matter what you do and it doesn't matter how you live. You keep living like this, it's going to be gone. And it was gone. Then it happened again when they rebuilt the temple. Hezekiah, Ezra, those stories in the return. And then it happened again in 164 BC. And Jesus says, it's going to happen again. You keep thinking, well, we're Jews, we're God's people. God would never let this happen. It's happened already. Happened before. I'm telling you, it's going to happen again. You have to be prepared. You have to be ready. And at the end of chapter 24, the whole necessity for being watchful, whatever you do, be alert, be aware, be watchful. Things are happening, things are coming. You can't assume that just because you live in Jerusalem and the temple is here, just because you're Jewish and you're God's child, doesn't mean that you can do anything you want and live any way you want to. Are you ready? It's going to happen. And so the parable, just before the parable of the talents, is the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. You had 5 wise bridesmaids, 5 foolish bridesmaids. The 5 wise bridesmaids, what did they do that indicated they were wise? Yeah, they had oil. They had enough oil. They had enough oil for the whole evening. The foolish ones said, well, I've got enough oil for the moment. This will be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, the groom delayed, and the oil ran out. I mean, that story just preceding the story of the talents is directly connected to what's going on. This is why these stories were told. All these stories. Be careful. Be watchful. Don't squander this moment. You don't know when the Lord's going to return. Be ready. Be watchful. And then he tells this story of the parable of the talents. I think at the largest level, this is a parable about discipleship. It's a parable about being aware of what's going on in the world and that nothing is guaranteed. There is no guarantee that you will live until tomorrow. There's no guarantee that something won't happen to you or your family. There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that the Lord will not return before the day is over. Take care of my possessions while I'm gone. I'm going to return. Take care of my possessions. Use what I've given you. It's yours while I'm gone. And then I'll return. But we don't know when. Don't know when. So what are we doing with what God has given? That's the biggest level, and I want to come back and return to that at the end, because that's a story as it plays itself all the way through, and it ends with this judgment of all the nations. Everything is about the end of time or the destruction of the temple, and all that's kind of merged together. There is no guarantee that the good life you have now will continue. None. So it matters how you live. It matters what you do with what I've given you here and now. All right, the second level down, as the word talent, as a weight, a measure, ultimately of something valuable, has by metaphor come to mean anything that God has given, my skills, my instincts, my talents. I don't always know how to distinguish a gift from a skill, but some things are given and some things are learned, right? Some things come with personality or with family or with DNA, and some things come because of experience and learning by whatever measure, but we come to a point in life in which we have skills or gifts or talents that we can use. Whatever those experiences are that got you to this point. Maybe about music, maybe about art, maybe about writing, it may be about leadership, it may be about healing or taking care of others, it may have to do with quiet service or public service. Some by nature are more introverted, some more extroverted, some are more left brain, the rational mind. Some are more right brain, the more artistic in nature. Whoever it is that you are, public or private, leader, manager, servant, good with money, bad with money, inherited a lot, inherited nothing, come from a home in which reading or education did not matter, some that did. Whatever one's background, it really doesn't matter. Who you are now is what God has gifted you with. And then the question is, how are you using it? What are you doing? What are you doing with it? How do I use my time, which is also a gift from God?
Was the term minas in the Acts version, in the Luke version, were minas more on the your side, or is that?
Yeah, it's a parallel. I don't think it's an identical story. It's a parallel story, but it's also a measure of money. Yeah, it works similarly in that way. But again, the metaphor, the larger metaphor, I think has to do with who you are and what you've been given. How we use our time, which, by the way, we've all been given as a gift exactly the same amount of time. Bob talked about this last week, as I recall. We have all been given identical gifts. How do you use your time? Time is a gift. So that's the second level, I think, that's worth our talking about. And then at the most practical level is taking the parable literally. So I asked Bob last week, what, in terms of this class on finances and stewardship, what do you need us to get to as the lesson objective? And he said, I don't want people to assume that risk is bad, because risk can either be wise or foolish. But life without risk is just almost unimaginable. All life has risks involved. And so he said, I hope that there is some understanding that risk is not only inevitable, but wise risk is good. So let's camp there for a minute. And this is where I'm going to need your wise help, and those of you who have actually spent time in the area of finances. I can tell you, through most of my career as a faculty member, money was being pulled out, matched by the university. There was money that I was required to put in retirement, and money the university was putting in retirement to match. And all that was going off somewhere. I had no idea where it was going. I just hoped that someday I would have some retirement when I got to be 71, hypothetically. And paid virtually no attention to it. If anyone had asked me when I was 40, what's your net worth? I would have said, when you say net worth, what exactly are you asking? Because I had no idea. I do remember a conversation with the folks from TIAA CREF, which is where money from that and many universities go. Some in terms of investment, some in terms of annuity. And I was told, because you're young, as I once was, you should be more aggressive in your investments. And in all honesty, I'm not even sure I knew what that meant. Had my father, who was still alive in those days, known how little I knew about investments and finances, my father, the accountant, my father, who was always wise with his money, he would have been embarrassed, if not humiliated. I had no idea. And I find myself from time to time talking to some folks who are in their 40s or older who have invested nothing in preparation for their retirement. There was a time in which, in fact, I came into ministry just kind of at the end of this period, because ministers in the old days received no retirement from the churches, but they were given a house to live in that the church owned. That was the compensation. We're not going to give you retirement, which meant they got a double hit. They had no retirement at the end of their time, nor did they have any equity from any property that they had invested in, because they were all the church's property. And I watched, when I was a young man, preachers who had spent 50, 60 years of devoted ministry, who literally had to live hand to mouth, dependent upon churches to take care of them. There were some missionaries that had come to work at ACU. When they left, they had literally nothing. And it began to at least awaken in me an awareness that I need to make sure that when I retire, that there is something there. So I cannot compare to at least a half a dozen of you in the room. I'm not a financial advisor, and some of you are. But there was a time in my life that I began to be far more aware. And for me, this is the line that I struggle with. Being aware, being wise. What's the language of the text? He went off and traded with the talents. I was aware of what was going on in that world, because I wanted to be able to provide for myself and my family as needed in my old age. And when I decided I better do that and know how much I had, then I found myself pushing over on the other side, absolutely worrying to death about what the market was doing. And I think the first time I became aware of that was in the late 80s. And I watched my net worth, which I now knew what it was, begin to drop, and the financial people were saying, "Don't look. Stop worrying about it. You're 35 years old. Stop." Finding that sweet spot between being wise and being anxious is, I think, a crucial place. But all of it involved a calculated measurement of risk. When I became maybe in my early 60s, I pulled my investments from the more aggressive to the less aggressive side. Because you don't want to engage in high risk when your lifespan at that point is shorter. because if you lose half of it and then you're at the end of your life, then you're in a mess. And so finding that way. This is what I'm hearing, the voice in my head from my conversation with Bob last week is saying, risk is good or can be good. Don't be risk averse. Don't take the money and put it in a safe and lock the key, because at least I have this little bit. But that money can be used for your future. Be aware. Be alert. Okay, now Ken and others of you who actually know what they're doing and know what they're talking about, wrap around that something that someone who actually knows what they're doing would say. Help talk about how we use our financial resources wisely at whatever age we are.
Yeah, most 401ks, 403bs, theocrat included.
Yeah.
That's what I did for years and years, was architect 401ks for companies and corporations, and then do individual counseling for.
Ken, we can't hear you.
I'm talking real slow. So there's a choice that you have inside your 401k. It's called an age-weighted choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's new. The financial planners are now, they're actually fiduciaries for your money. And so they're looking for an investment that's right for you. So your family's investment portfolio may be the only money that you'll ever see. On the other hand, you may have a guy that's working 2 cubes away that's going to inherit $2.2 million from his father. So those investment portfolios should be dramatically different. But if you don't know that you don't know, then you may say, well, what do you put your money in? That's really the wrong place for you to put yours.
Yeah.
And so now these age weighted, if you are from 25 to 40, and what happens is during that 40 to 55 and from 55 to 70, the money moves more and more conservatively based on your age. Exactly what Jack said earlier. The interesting thing is, though, with most 401ks, 403bs, you have the option to invest your money in a certain way and the company's money in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So that match money is all pre-tax, and so is your money in your 401k. So you can choose to invest your money more conservatively and the match money then more aggressively.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually what happens. The other part of that is always having an emergency fund, as Jack said, so that you have some of that pillow insurance, if you will, to say that I have this money set aside for a rainy day in case I am no longer employed. So the guy that says, well, I'm going to try to invest and get all my money in retirement going forward, that aggression will get you bankrupt. On the other hand, if you put the money just in a managed yard, keep burying those jars out there in the backyard, that's the servant with one towel. Because you're not even getting the normal inflation cost of the cost of insurance or the cost of interest going up. The problem with most of that is that we try to self-educate. So when I knew that I needed some dental implants, I went and talked to Don Shaw, a professional in dental implants. And I said, I need to become educated, but I will never agree to do my own dental implants. I just had a knee replacement. I studied and studied and studied, watched videos, and all that was done, but I am not going to do my own knee replacement. So my generic suggestion is do what you do best, but rent the rest. Hire a financial planner that is very diverse in understanding how that 401k works, how that fits in with your family and your spouse's family, how that all that choreographs together. But please don't listen to your brother-in-law nor the gal that works in the cube beside you. Because remember, if you talk to your brother-in-law, he was smart enough to marry your sister, so maybe he's not so smart after all. So, or the other way around, that's right. So sometimes I think we We're our own worst enemy to an extent. Yeah. In that we say, well, I'm a degreed engineer, I ought to know how to do this myself. And that is never true. I have moved, when gals retired from a big firm, multi-million dollars in their 401k.
Mm-hmm.
But I say, well, how much of that did you personally invest? So you can look and see what the principal is. The rest of that is match money and earnings. So,
Yeah, that's helpful. And one of the other things that I would say is, and I'm telling you more than I actually know, so forgive me if the language is not right. But the miracle of compound interest, when you invest as a young person, market goes up, the market goes down, and you see very little change, and that may be that way for 25 or 30 years, and there's just a point in which some huge jumps begin to happen, which is to say, don't wait until you're 60 to begin. I do a couple of things as we pull some things to a close. The parable is not primarily about investing money. And we live in a time and an age of some extraordinary advantages, and there are, frankly, some advantages based upon the country that we live in, and even the part of town that we live in, that we must not overlook. Part of the work that I did in Dallas before becoming here was working with people who lived in the poorest zip code in the state of Texas, in South Dallas. And if someone had said to them, now, you need to be wise in the houses that you buy, because you know property gains in value over the years, and then when you buy a new house, and then you're going to make money and you build equity, and here's how equity works, and over time, that's the wealth you're going to pass on to your children and your grandchildren as the wealth that you've accumulated because of the value of your home, when their home value was not going up at all. You live out in the suburbs, and one thing happens, and you live in other places, and they don't. It's a part of what I was dealing with, where families who lived around Fair Park in Dallas, and because, I mean, this is literally documented. We've seen the language. It's just frightening. But in the 1960s, the mostly white people who came to the State Fair of Texas every year felt guilty or embarrassed when they came to the State Fair because they didn't like to see the houses and the property of the blacks, which is not the word that they use to describe them, who lived nearby, and that they would feel more likely to come to the State Fair if they didn't have to worry about that. And so something like 140 acres of land around Fair Park in Dallas was what's the word I'm looking for? I am old and I can't remember. So the property, eminent domain. Eminent domain was applied, and homes owned by white people were given 10 times more than the homes of black people in those neighborhoods. And those people then had nowhere to live and nowhere to go. And we were able to trace what happened to their lives in the next 50 years. It's one thing for us to talk about investments and make sure you're making wise decisions about your home when our world is not entirely just and not everyone has the same advantage. And home values and therefore inherent wealth does not work the same for everyone. And I want us to be aware also of those who do not have our advantages. But beyond the fiscal picture, beyond what happens to our finances and whatever wisdom and discernment and judgment belongs in those conversations, and they do, and what Bob does and what Ken does and others is extremely valuable and important, and I believe in it. The larger picture is a story of discipleship, is a story of how we live our lives before the God who has given us everything. I find it difficult to understand whether my income is $10,000 a year or $10 million a year. All of it belongs to God. All of it. My home belongs to God. It's not mine to do whatever I want to. It belongs to God. My time, my talents do not belong to me. They belong to God. And I struggle mightily with those that would say, boy, these are just really hard times right now, and I'm just going to give none of it to the work of the kingdom. I'm not going to give a penny of it for God's work in this community. My mind does not grasp. And for me, that's the closest I can come to what it is like just to bury it, to be given something and to bury it. It's not ours. It doesn't belong to me. None of it belongs to me. All of it is God's. But some of it, surely, as I imagine the use of wealth and talents and time, surely some of it is used by the community of Christians to which we are a part, or of which we are a part. And the larger issue then for me is this discipleship issue about preparation and readiness. Not just about when the Lord may come. He may come tomorrow. He may not come for 1,000,000 years. How am I using today what God has given me ultimately for kingdom purpose, not for my own? And using wisdom and a willingness to risk the first fruits of our lives and of our income, to give first to God and to God's kingdom and to God's work, is a part of, I think, the preparation and the discipleship to which God has called us to live. So forgive me, I almost went into a little sermon there. That happens from time to time. Let's end in prayer. Thank you, Father, for this discussion, this important conversation. Thank you for Bob and his willingness to engage in this topic, this difficult topic for many reasons, and to do so in such a kind and good and helpful ways. For all the people in this class who share in these questions and these struggles and what it means to be human and what it means to be ready to live prepared and to live as good and wise servants of yours. I pray your blessings upon each of them here, that we may be the kind of people that you called us to be. In Jesus' name.